So our first panel today is going to be talking about the world of writing, and it will cover novel writing, playwriting, writing for film and television. I want to introduce our panelists first, all of whom are alums who have traveled from far and wide or digitally traveled. First is Karen Hall, who is a graduate of William & Mary, class of 1978.
You don't have to say that part.
Class of something or other. Karen's originally from Chatham, Virginia. Graduated from William & Mary with a BA in English. Received an MFA from UVA's playwriting program. And Karen went on to produce and write for series such as Judging Amy, MASH, Eight is Enough, Hill Street Blues, Moonlighting, Roseanne, basically everything I watched in the 80s. And growing up, you impacted my maturity.
It's my fault.
Women of Brewster Place, Grace Under Fire. She's also written episodes of Northern Exposure, I'll Fly Away, and The Good Wife. She's also the author of a novel titled Dark Debts, a Southern Gothic horror novel. So, Karen, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And next I have Sherry Holman, class of 88. I'm sorry, classes are just going to be put up.
Yeah, please.
Right.
You can do the, class of 2011. If you
That's, everyone's from class of 2011.
Okay.
Sherry came to us today from New York, but she's originally from Richmond, Virginia. She graduated from the college with a BA in theater. She acted professionally for a few years and then eventually made the move to publishing, first as an assistant to a literary agent, Molly Friedrich. She then went on to write her own novels. A Stolen Tongue was her first, was published by Grove Atlantic in '97, and wound up being translated into 13 languages. Her next book, The Dress Lodger, in 2000 was a national bestseller. Was named to the New York Times Notable Book of the Year, was one of the New York Public Library's Books to Remember, and was longlisted for the Dublin Impact Award. Sherry is currently at work on her, and I'm sorry, this is...
Actually, this is a dated biography.
This might be dated because I stole it from the internet.
There you go. No, I can talk about what I've recently done.
So I will let you talk about what you are currently doing. But also, interestingly enough, Sherry serves on the board of The Moth in New York, which I will let her talk about too. It's a great program. And lastly, Ashley Edward Miller, who joins us from beautiful, sunny, but very early Los Angeles. Ashley, thank you for joining us at 6:30 a.m.
This is actually the first time I ever made anything on time that started at 9:30 at William & Mary.
The students who got up for 9:30 really can't complain now. So. Ashley is also a native of the Virginia area. He's from Northern Virginia originally. Graduated from TJ, School for Science and Technology, as we talk about people's backgrounds winding up in writing. He studied English and government at William & Mary and went on to teach middle school English and creative writing in Fairfax County after graduating. After some time, he started writing and met a writing partner, Zach Stentz, over the internet from their love, and he'll tell us more about this, from all things Star Trek. Since then, Ashley and Zach have written and produced hundreds of hours of television, most notably episodes, a series, Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, Twilight Zone revival on UPN, and Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
And Fringe.
And Fringe. Ashley's also written feature films, most notably Thor and X-Men First Class. And most relevantly today, Ashley is about to release a new young adult fiction novel called Colin Fisher that will, does it go on sale on Monday, Ash?
It was actually released on the 1st so that Amazon could do a promotion with it. It was officially released today. I'm sorry, what day is today? Is it Friday? It was officially released yesterday.
Very cool. So buy Colin Fisher. Support your alumni.
But not from Amazon.
but yeah,
A local
exactly.
independent
Buy
bookseller.
multiple copies.
The holidays are coming up.
That's right.
I own a bookstore and it has a website, so
There you
go
go.
there, blackbearbooks.com.
Let me see here. I'm going to go to the questions. So let's start with the simple stuff. I know a lot of what we chatted with the students who came to the career mentoring panels yesterday. A lot of questions about how people get started in the entertainment world. So why don't we start with how you all got your start graduating from William & Mary?
Do you want me to go?
Sure.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, I can tell you how I started, but it will have absolutely nothing to do with how you're going to start. So I'll be very brief. Well, the part that will have something to do with it is I started here, and I took Dr. Catron's playwriting course because I heard two people on a JBT bus talking about how if you could get it past him, you could launch it on Broadway, and that sounded good to me. And it was true. But I went there, and I had never taken playwriting before. I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was 6, and it just really felt like home to me. So I stayed there and really loved playwriting, and I'm really glad that that was my background, because I think the way I taught is the reason that I'm in my 33rd or 34th year when the average writer span is 10 years, I'm told. And it's because I got such a great foundational background here. A lot of kids, and I'm reading stuff now, when I'm on a show to try to decide who to hire, and the stuff that's coming from famous film schools is all just very derivative because it's based on what people, what movies they saw. And the way we were taught, Dr. Catron taught us to work from a credo, and he said to me, how can you know what you want to write if you don't know what you believe? So, and he's very strong on self as source. So, I can talk about that later if you want me to, but I had a really good background from here. And then I went to UVA. I actually don't have an MFA. I have half of an MFA because I had to write and produce a play to get moved into the second year of the program, and the jury moved me on unanimously, but my advisor told me that he was going to veto their decision unless I gave up the idea of writing for television because I was wasting my talent. So I basically got kicked out, which is why I don't send them checks. And went to California to waste my talent, which I've been doing for 34 years. But when I was on Hill Street Blues, I got a letter from him saying, asking me how he could break into television, the guy who kicked me out. So I planned several letters in my head, and then I decided I was too busy wasting my talent. But I moved out there, and I had taken a summer course through the University of Richmond. The professors were mostly interested in the sociology of television, and they wrote books about that. But they were meeting Alan Alda, and I was a huge MASH fan, so I went out there so I could meet Alan Alda. And I talked to him about my writing, and he asked me to send him some of my plays, so I did. And he called me here at my sorority house, and my sorority sister who answered the phone, when he said, "This is Alan Alda," she said, "Yeah, and this is Robert Redford," and hung up on him. But I went out there and I did typing and filing, temporary stuff for 11 months, and then I got a call from him saying that MASH was looking to hire another person, for another writer, and he really wanted them to hire a woman because there'd never been a female staff writer. They had female freelance writers, a couple of them. So I went in for the interview, and I ended up writing a freelance for them. That got me a job as a staff writer on a show called 8 is Enough. That got canceled at the end of the year. I've been on a lot of shows wherein that was their last year. I don't know if that's cause and effect. But anyway, then MASH asked me to come back and be on staff. And after that, it was just easy to keep working because once you have MASH as a credit. In fact, when they offered me the job, I called my agent. I said, I don't want to take this job. And he said, why not? And I said, because it's MASH. They're brilliant, and they'll fire me in a week. And he said, if they fire you in a week, you'll live off it forever. So luckily, they didn't fire me in a week.
And Sherry, how about you? How did you get, so you started acting, and how did you make the jump to, let's start even just out of college.
Right. Well, I was here as a theater major, and I graduated in 1988. And I actually moved to New York to be an actress. Like most of the theater majors in my class, we just sort of moved en masse to New York. And I had done primarily classical theater here, and Chekhov and Shakespeare and the Virginia Shakespeare Festival and down in the Georgia Shakespeare Festival. And when I got to New York and I was supposed to be going to auditions, I would find myself instead going to poetry readings. And it was the late 80s. It was sort of the time of the advent of the poetry slams. And I would go down to St. Mark's Poetry Project and the New Eurekan and hang out in all these places. And I found myself, I'd always written, but I'd sort of gotten sidetracked into acting while I was here. And I also took a class with Dr. Catron, who was amazing. He's very tough on his writers, and we didn't always agree, but I learned an enormous amount, you know, through working with him. And my mother, who's in the back, my mom and stepfather back there, but she, you know, she's like, you always have to have a job. If you want to be a writer, you have to know how to type, you know. So she made me take typing. I was like, I don't want to be a secretary. But, you know, it's like I learned how to type and word processing. And when I got to New York and I just needed work, you know, because if you're going to do anything in New York, you still have to support yourself. I signed up with temporary agencies, and I asked them to please assign me to publishing houses. You could kind of do that back in the day. And I got a job, a couple of different temp jobs, and I got a job working at Penguin Books, Viking Penguin. As a liaison between marketing and editorial. And so I would write my poetry and I would do the stuff at night and I would go have this day job. And the one good thing about working in publishing is they pay you crap, but you get a lot of free books. So I would kind of steal these books off the shelf and I'd sort of, you know, read them under my desk when I was supposed to be working. And I just sort of like filled my head with all this stuff. And hanging around in the world of publishing, I always knew I sort of wanted to write, but I had no idea how to go about it. I hadn't gone through an MFA program or anything. And I heard two editorial assistants talking about this magical thing called an advance. And I'd never heard of this. It's like, what is this thing called an advance? You know, where they give you money up front, you know, and then you go off and you write your book. And I was like, I would like one of these things called an advance. So that's literally how I became a writer. And so I was taking a class with a novelist, Nicholas Kristof, at the 62nd Street Y in New York. And he had been living in Greece, and he said that it was very cheap to be in Greece. So I quit my job, I gave up my apartment, I broke up with this horrible boyfriend I had, I left the country and I moved to Greece to write my first novel. And I told this story to some of the students that were here, but like when I came back, I'd left my bank card, my ATM card with $800 in my bank account with a friend in case I had an emergency. She could wire me money. And so I got back after 4 months in Greece with, you know, 150 pages of just the biggest mess. It was, you know, about my only one-night stand, a rhinoceros that thought he could fly, a Pentecostal girl, Greek mythology, Percy Bysshe Shelley. It was like, you know, it was like every idea I'd ever had in my head, and it was going to be a novel, right? And so I came back and I went to my bank account to get some money so I could get an apartment. And this woman that I'd left my bank card with had stolen all of my money and gone to hide at her parents' house in Long Island. So she's another William.and.Mary alumni, but we will not mention her name.
I think I had her for a roommate.
Yeah, you might have. Exactly. So I get back. I've got no job, no apartment, you know, no money, and about 150 pages of big fat mess of a novel. And this is how there's no one right way to go about doing things, right? Because I'd taken this huge risk and I'd made this gamble, and I thought, I have made the biggest mistake of my life. But what happened is when I got back and I had to scramble for a new job, I ended up having, because I'd worked at Penguin, they published a writer, Terry McMillan, who wrote Waiting to Exhale and How Stella Got Her Groove Back. And her literary agent was looking for an assistant. And so they said, go over and talk to Molly. And Molly liked me, and we got along really, really well, and she hired me. And she knew that I wanted to be a writer, so she offered to read the pages that I had, you know, I'd done while I was in Greece. I was 24 years old at the time. And so she took the pages home on a Friday night, and on Monday she called me into her office. I was very excited. I walked in, and she held out my pages to me, and she went, no. And I asked her, I said, listen, you know, I want a second opinion. I don't care who you send it to, but just send it to any editor and let me hear back from them. And so she sent it to Sue Grafton's editor, who's a very famous mystery writer. A is for alibi, B is for burglar. And editor sent me back a 3-page single-space rejection letter, but it was so encouraging. And that's when I sat down and taught myself how to write. And I worked in this office reading manuscripts, bad manuscripts, good manuscripts. I saw the things that sold. I saw the things that bombed. You know, I learned from other people's mistakes. And I wrote in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning before I went to work. I wrote on the weekends. I wrote at night. And when I'd finished the novel that became my first published novel, and I gave it to Molly, she's like, it's not going to be easy, but I want to try to sell it. And we ended up having an auction. It went to Grove Atlantic. My next novel was a big bestseller. I've won a bunch of awards. The novel that I just finished up, that's just recently come out, is called Witches on the Road Tonight. And I'll be talking to Karen because I have a wonderful agent in Los Angeles, and so I'm trying to adapt it as a TV series. So for my first time, I'm kind of coming full circle back to the theater and playwriting by, you know, I've written 5 novels now, and now I'm trying to adapt my latest novel for television. So I love it. It's really exciting, and you know, we'll see if it goes anywhere.
Very cool. Thank you.
In a very peripatetic way.
And there's also a moral in there about having a business manager to keep your $800.
Yes, keep your $800 safe. Put it under your mattress.
So for those of you in the business world, there's also value there. And Ashley, how about you? You want to tell us how you got your start and went from teaching middle school to writing for X-Men First Class?
Sure. I mean, that's like a 20-year journey. And by the way, I just want to say for the record, I didn't so much graduate from William and Mary as they handed me a degree and kindly asked me to leave. I was the Star Trek plan, which means I did 5 years, and I finally kind of made it out with my English degree, which, by the way, kind of saved my life as it turned out, and turned out to be critical to moving our career to the next level. But I'll get to that. So when I got out of William and Mary, I had no discernible job skills, and so I did what anybody else would do. I became a teacher, and that was a great gig. I really, enjoyed it. I loved my kids. I loved teaching, and it was a tremendous experience, but it was exhausting, and it wasn't what I wanted. I was trying to write on the side, but I was so tired that I couldn't. I'd been writing since I was 3. Kind of telling stories to my mom and having her write them down, and then I would write them, and then I thought I'd be a novelist, but I didn't have the discipline to be a novelist, and I thought I'd write short stories. But if you've tried to write short stories and sell them, you realize that you'll spend more on postage than you'll make actually selling the short stories. So I ended up doing, a sort of, depending on how you count it, 5 to 10 year stint working for the Department of Defense as a contractor through SAIC. I was an analyst. I turned into a math guy. Yeah, that's a whole other long story too. But while I was doing that, I was working on my writing, and I discovered screenwriting, which the great thing about screenwriting is that it has a lot of structure, and I discovered the power of outlining. I started to plan things out like it was Operation Overlord, like we were going to storm the beaches of Normandy. And once I started doing that, it's like a light clicked on. So I wrote constantly, met my writing partner on the internet, arguing about Star Trek in 1997 or so. We started writing together. We wrote 2.5 screenplays together, and we pitched Star like 5 times without ever having met, ever having seen a picture, because that was when the internet was cans and string, and you just, it was like The Usual Suspects when you're fast out of Kaiser Soze, and it takes the whole movie. So, we finally, I guess, in 1999, we had befriended a man named Robert Wolfe, who created Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda, and Robert some of our pitches for Star Trek, and wanted to buy one of them for the show. So he invited us in to pitch. We pitched him 7 stories. He bought 5. He gave us an assignment that was basically an audition for a staff. We turned that in about 3 hours after we were done breaking it, and 2 weeks later he called and offered me a job. So I literally moved to LA with the job, spent 3 years on that show. Between that and The Twilight Zone, wrote Agent Cody Banks, which was just one of those things where they had work they'd been developing for 2 years, and they had Frankie Muniz, and they had a window. And they were desperately looking for writers. And we kind of went in and we gave them very depressing news, which was their script didn't work at all, and it needed to be completely rewritten. And they were terrified, and they're like, well, we need it in, 3 weeks. And we're like, 3 weeks? Come on. It's only 120 pages. So, we wrote that. That movie got made. We ended up on The Twilight Zone, which was a nightmare. It was like kind of being in the Twilight Zone. But we actually learned a lot because, the process on that show was it was an anthology, and it was a half-hour anthology. And those half hours needed to fill an hour, which means that every week you were inventing the characters and inventing the world. But you were also passing it through the showrunner, the creator, both of whom had different ideas of what the show was, the studio, and neither of whom knew what the show was and had a different idea about it every week. So, it was a little bit like Stalingrad, where it was just you sent stories out, you just kept sending stories, and eventually, like, one made it through, and, you just thank God for that. So we had a fallow period. We made the rookie mistake of not saying yes when a bigger agency came along. And we got a shot at life when we were offered a job on Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and who was the creator of that show, and the showrunner read a pilot script, a spec pilot script that we'd written called Colin Fisher, which became the basis of our YA novel, and he loved it. And he said, "This is how I want my Terminators to be. I want them to be 14-year-olds with Asperger's syndrome." We're like, okay, awesome. I taught middle school. So that show, loved it, moved to Fringe. In between Terminator and Fringe, we got hired onto Thor. Okay, so remember when I said that my English degree actually saved our career and moved it to the next level? This is how. So being an English major, I had taken creative writing classes, Nancy Schoenberg, David Jenkins. They were great classes. It's all short fiction. I didn't, take any classes on how to write a play, on how to write any of that. I had taken that. And one night, I just popped in Kenneth Branagh as Henry V. And I thought, now I get Shakespeare. So I took literally every Renaissance lit class that Peter Wiggins offered. I was there or not. I took Martin Haycox's literary criticism class, which was amazing, his modern British lit class, which was great, all of this stuff, right? Which was fantastic. It taught me how to read, really, truly read and engage a text, and break it down. And it taught me a lot about Shakespeare. So cut to 2009, 2008, and I'm sitting in a room with Kenneth Branagh. Suddenly, I'm like having a conversation with this guy about Thor, which was great because I know everything about Thor. I'm going to quickly turn the camera and show you my comic book collection. Okay, so that I had covered. But what was amazing was suddenly being in a conversation with this man who is probably the greatest living Shakespearean actor of our age, who is just a genius, who thinks about this stuff constantly, and be able to have a real conversation with him about comic books and about, Henry IV, Part 2, to really kind of dance with him on that, and also to understand what he wanted from that film. So it was a really great, really, really great collaborative experience. In fact, a little bit of a digression, probably the best day of my life, other than the birth of my child, which is insane, but was the day. It was very late in the development of the script, and Ken was talking about Hamlet, as you might imagine, Kenneth Branagh talking about Hamlet, and he was talking about how he had spent the better part of his life kind of analyzing that play and trying to understand what the third act soliloquy meant, and he said, and I finally figured it out. And he started to talk about how it connected to a speech at the end of Act 4. It's after Claire has walked in and said, "Okay, dude, you totally drove my sister nuts and screwed up everybody's life, and I'm just going to have to take you out and kill you. And Hamlet says to Horatio, yeah, I'm a dick. I deserve it, which is not the actual dialogue. But, he gives this speech about how, he tried to control events, but they controlled him. When he let things happen, he had control. It was, what is it? Do you try to intervene, or do you let be? And the answer is let be. Except Ken didn't break it down like that. He went into the speech, and he didn't recite it. He didn't read it. He didn't perform it. The man is sitting there in a T-shirt and jeans and chucks, and he's got him kicked up on a conference table, and he's looking at me, and suddenly I'm Horatio, and he's Hamlet, and he's just Hamlet. And I swear to God, I burst into tears. Just the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, except for my infant son flying out of his mother, pooping himself. That was because of Thor. It was something that helped us get to X-Men, which was a lot like Cody Banks in that they had a script that did not work. They had a very tight schedule. In this case, it was 10 days. So we wrote X-Men in 10 days, and it was shot, honestly, largely as it was written in those 10 days. It was pure desperation. We actually wrote the third act the day that it was due. It was just pure, oh God, oh God, oh God, which I think television is great training for. Yes. And going to William & Mary was great training for that too, because that was usually so. Yeah, just total abject fear, I think, has been the key to my success.
So there's something that you all sort of touched upon in the changes in writing and also getting into writing and making a living of it over the years. Ashley mentioned that the internet was in its early stages when he started. Karen, when you started it
wasn't a dream yet.
It was still in Al Gore's head.
Yes, it was.
So, and it's changing more and more every day. There's, now blogs. So one of the things about technology, how has the speed of getting stuff to market changed either your job or the quality of it? The one thing that a lot of people talk about is, is there real, editing, or, Ash, you just talked about you have 10 days. The speed to get things to market, how does that, impact your writing, both doing it and then the quality?
It hasn't changed that much. But before I say why, I just want to say that I want to be in a room with Kenneth Branagh. Every single time I write something and they say, who do you envision as the male lead? I say Kenneth Branagh, even if it's an 18-year-old drug dealer, I don't care. But, when I was on Moonlighting, we were literally, somebody told me they drove to work on a Tuesday and saw us shooting a scene somewhere in LA that was on television that night. We were writing them, we were taking pages to the set and saying, say this. But Ashley's really right that William & Mary was perfect training for that, because I can't tell you how many papers I wrote in a typewriter the night before they were due.
Before they were due.
Yes, yeah. Because I could. But it was really good training. And Dr. Caitron's class was perfect training for being a staff writer, because we had to write 3 one-act plays in one semester and rewrite them 3 times each. And then we would sit around in the room and critique them for each other and give each other notes, and it was just the exact replica of what I was about to go do. I'm writing an independent, small-budget independent movie right now, and I just got back from the research trip, and it's due by the end of the year. So, and I own a retail business, and it's Christmas. So that should be, Moonlighting would be good help for that. But I don't think that the technology has changed, how much time you have to do something. And I do think that how much time you have to do it hurts the quality of it a great deal of the time. When I was running Judging Amy, we had a script, we had a table reading, and I could tell the script didn't work at all. So I went and checked into a hotel, and I'd had to shoot the next day. So I had 24 hours to write the entire script. The good thing about that is they have no time to give you stupid notes. So, if anything good comes to you, it ends up on the screen. I used to try to explain to people that the reason television is, like 1 hour drama is not as good as they want it to be is we have to do 22 to 24 episodes, and we have I think we start about a month early, so we try to get as many scripts ahead as we can, and it's usually about 4 maybe. And then as you go on, you get to the point where you have a week, and we have to do what we call gang banging them, which is, 4 people. That's what we did on Moonlighting. We had 4 writing entities. We had 1 set of partners and 3 writers. And so we would come in the morning, and from 9 o'clock in the morning till noon, we'd all write an act. And then we'd have a script by lunch, and then we would give each other notes. So, that just has been the way it's worked forever. And I don't see technology having changed that much. You have more places to go and not have enough time to write the script. So.
Sherry, how about in the published world? Because I know there's a lot of rush now that you can get
Right.
things out to e-readers.
Right. Well, publishing is in complete free fall and collapse right now. I mean,
Yes,
you should
it
just
is.
know that if you're at all interested in going into it. It's like they don't know what they're doing. They're,
See what it
it's
says on my notes?
Oh.
Publishers have not got
I
it figured
figured it out. Yeah, that's exactly. And they'll be the first to tell you
I
that.
own a bookstore. They need to put books out in paperback. No one is buying
Yes,
$30
nobody's buying
hardcovers.
hardcover. And my
Okay.
publisher, Grove Atlantic, which has always been sort of on the forefront of, edgier fiction, that's the trend that they're going to. In Europe they do French flaps, which are these really nicely, beautifully bound trade paperbacks, but they're paper. Because I'm a writer, I don't buy hardcover books. They send them
Nobody
to me for
has the
free, but
money,
nobody
huh?
has the money, and it's pointless. And now with e-readers, and I actually have I hate to say I have a Nook, but I do, especially for research, when I'm having to, read a lot of stuff for research quickly, I'll download things. But I mostly buy trade paperbacks from my independent bookstore, my local independent bookstore. I think there's just an enormous amount of pressure on writers now to be constantly promoting themselves. And part of the problem is, everybody's supposed to be on Facebook or Twitter or have a blog or whatever, which leaves you no time to actually do your writing. And so a lot of times you have to push back a little bit. You have to resist, because if the quality of your product goes down, people will turn off of you. They don't want to buy your stuff anymore. And you have to sort of stand up and say, no, I'm going to write what I need to write, and be willing to take less money for it. I also have 3 children, so it's even harder to find the time to write. So I am on Facebook, but I refuse to tweet, because I'm like, who cares what I'm having for dinner? It's like, it's pointless. It's contentless, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think novelists, because we have just like that little bit of cachet, can be just snotty enough to say, I'm not going to do it. And so, but at the same time, I'm making my first foray into writing for television. So it's going to be a whole nother thing. But I feel like my writing has become more fragmented because of social media. I think in smaller packets now, and maybe it's also having the 3 children, I don't have that luxury of time to create something. And so my last novel was actually much more cinematic and lends itself to dialogue, and I think to a television series treatment. So I think it's kind of almost gotten into our heads and changed the way our attention spans are shrinking because of so much social media. That's my feeling about it.
Ashley, how about in television for you, and also feature film writing? Has it, there's obviously always a rush to get stuff to studios, but has it changed at all in your world?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First of all, my career would not be possible without the internet and without technology as we know it today. I would never have met my writing partner. We never would have met Robert Wolfe, who gave us our first job. In fact, I think one of the really interesting and I think unique features of that period in the 90s, when the internet was like the Wild West and it was untamed, was that you could actually make contact with people who were in our profession. You could actually befriend them. There wasn't a lot of fear on anybody's part about what that meant. We hadn't, yet figured out that somebody could be an FBI agent. So it's something where I think I owe everything to it. In terms of our process, Zach, again, we didn't meet for 2.5 years. We were 2,500 miles apart, and we did everything by email and by telephone. We had that way. And when we write, we divide up and then we come back. It's like well, I guess it's like it's not a gangbang, it's a three-way with the script in the middle. Yeah, it takes a lot longer and it's not as exciting. But it's a lot of going back and doing it again because you screwed it up the first time. I'm just going to carry this too far, but the process in terms of writing quickly depends on being able to rewrite quickly. For example, when we were working on X-Men, we literally spent, I'd say, half of our 5 days writing and rewriting the first act. I kid you not. To the point where in the middle of that period, I called our executive, who was wonderful and brilliant, and I love him, and he's actually the best studio executive in the history of the system. And I said, dude, it's Wednesday. We have 30 pages. We have 5 more days, and if we don't have 120 pages, then we fail, and it will be your fault. So we need to get the hell out of Act 1. But it wouldn't have been possible to do that at all without the internet. And I think what the technology has done for television, it's been a positive and a negative. I think on the positive side, it means that the workflow is simpler so that you can get pages to set, you can deal with notes and all those things more quickly. On the negative side, it makes people feel like they can just do things and it doesn't have an impact, that the time requirement doesn't change. But look, there are some fundamentals, regardless of the technology, that I think will always be the same. And I think, somebody touched on this. It's, well, when do you write? And how do you sort of avoid distraction? Well, here's the thing. This is my canned speech. It requires discipline. I'm up every morning at 4:30 a.m. to write. I write 12 hours a day. I often do that 6 to 7 days a week. I just do it. I'm a machine. Anybody who went to William and Mary with me would be stunned to hear that news. It's infamous for declaring class amnesty days, which became class amnesty weeks. That maybe if William and Mary had offered me money instead of a degree, I would have been a better student. But have that discipline. That's just a reality. You can tell yourself a lot of things about why you're not writing. It's all bull crap. Sorry, it just is. How you deal with distraction is entirely up to you. And I'll say one thing kind of about the effects of social media. I think that Twitter or posting on Facebook can be like anything else. If you are looking for a reason to procrastinate or to not do what you do, then you will find it. You will find a way to excuse yourself from the responsibility of doing your work. The end. I think also that these things, that what technology has done for writers has, it's certainly changed things, but it's offered a tool. And like any tool, you use it the way that you want to use it. I think that if Twitter is a means of, just kind of telling people what you had for lunch or that you're doing your laundry, okay. But for example, my writing partner is insane and brilliant, and he'll just start tweeting about like the Byzantine Empire. I swear to God, I don't know why, but he does. Often I used to tweet a lot more than I do now. I would tweet about the writing process and engage people in those conversations. And sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it's just a colossal waste of time. But you have to take responsibility for what you're doing. The net positive is that it's helped raise the profile of writers, which I think is really good, because I think people are aware that writers are out there and that they have personalities, and that they're worth engaging, and that they have interesting things to say, and they don't just live in a box. But your mileage may vary.
Well, now that raises a question, and you all touched on marketing yourselves, and so one of the questions is whether it's a literary agent for novels, an agent at a CAA or a WME for film and television, for a lot of people, how important is that in your life, practical terms, in terms of finding you work, finding the opportunities so you can focus on your writing, and then also getting to those people, because I know when I worked at WME for a while, and so many scripts came in, so there's really two questions there. One, what is the real practical benefit of having an agent or a manager, and then how did you all find them?
Well, it's not really a question of whether or not you want to do it. You have to do it.
You have to do it. Yeah.
Because nobody's going to hire you if you don't have one. The most success stories I'm aware of recently, they did the thing where they got the job as an assistant to an agent or an assistant to a writer, and you know, if you're an assistant to a writer and you pester them long enough, they'll read your stuff, and you know, if you pester them longer than that, they'll eventually let you write a freelance episode. But those entry-level jobs in show business are really hard to get because everybody has 12 friends they want to give that job to. But if they are looking at resumes, you have to have a degree. You pretty much, from my experience, have to have a degree from a prestigious college, and William & Mary still counts, even if you have to explain to them what William & Mary is. But you know, the people I know in entry-level jobs are graduates from Ivy League colleges or Ivy League comparable colleges, and you know, and that's because they have 16,000 applications. They can do that. You know, when I hire for the bookstore, we hire somebody with a BA in English, or they're working on a BA in English for a minimum wage job, because, you know, that's what you're up against. And it's always been hard, and it's really hard now because, you know, I think the recession hit show business before it did anywhere else, mostly because they use any whiff to use it as an excuse to not pay you. So it was, you know, the economy was tightening up in show business a long time before it really did. Because they figured out that in the 80s they gave lots of people multi-million-dollar development deals to do nothing, which, you know, it was their fault, but we suffer from. But the way I got an agent was, I don't recommend this, but I was living with a roommate who was a model, and she was dating a guy who was also dating an entertainment attorney. He broke up with her, but he gave my script to the attorney. And she really liked it, and she gave it to a good agency. And you know, I had a backdoor in because of Alan Alda, but what my producer who hired me told me later was that he didn't realize when I came in to pitch to them that I was the person Alan Alda was talking about, and he had hired me because he got a good script from a good agency. So. You know, you can send them, most of them will not read unsolicited material. Most of them will send it back to you because they don't want you calling them later and saying, you know, good wife stole my subplot and I'm going to sue them. I think that really, you know, people always get mad at me when I say this, but if you want to be in show business, you have to move to Los Angeles and bump into people at you know, places you go. Because you just can't, you know, it was true when I was here, and even though there's the internet, I can do my work on the internet now, but I could not have broken in on the internet because it really matters. They want to see your face. They want you not to ugly up their cocktail parties. So, you know, that's really what you have to do. But, you know, once you get there, then start finding out who other people know and, you know, finding out where they go, and eventually you can get your script to somebody who eventually will hire you in an entry-level position. Now, if you have some quirky way in, that's different, but we always tell people not to anticipate that they're going to be the exception. It's like you're not going to be the waitress in Grapevine who wrote Thelma and Louise. You're just not.
Sherry, how about do you have value of agents in
I mean, I think you have to have an agent. I mean, nobody takes you seriously if you don't. I mean, now there's some internet publishing and self-publishing, and you can go that route. But if you want to have an established career, these are the people that vet you, that vouch for you, that say that you're good. And, you know, you're as good as your agent. Your agent has to have sold big projects. They have to have a good reputation. You know, my agent, if she sends something out on Friday, she gets responses on Monday. It's like the people send messengers for things, you know, because she's earned that by having books that constantly make bestseller lists and that win prizes. And so you want to do that. And then what I told a lot of you guys that hung out with me yesterday, I said the exact same thing. If you want to be in entertainment, you have to live in New York or Los Angeles. It's just, don't believe it if they tell you can do it from, because it's, you know, we were talking about The Moth, which is something that I became involved with in 1997. And for those of you guys that don't know it, it's a storytelling organization. We have a radio show on NPR now. We kind of got discovered by Ira Glass, who does This American Life, and that sort of launched it. But it started in my friend George Green's living room. And, you know, he was a friend of mine. He was a writer. I worked for a literary agent. We represented him. We became friends. He asked me to be on the board of directors. I was 30 years old. And it started as this small thing, and now it's this huge international organization. We work with Penn. You know, we do things, you know, at Symphony Space. Like I said, we have a radio show now. And we all met each other from hanging out in bars when we were in our 20s. You know, because the people that you grow up with are going to become executive producers and senior editors, and you guys will know each other for real. You know, you'll be real friends, and you'll help each other, and your friends will help their friends, and it's networking, but it's not creepy because it's organic. You know, you've got to be friendly, you've got to be funny, you've got to be smart, and you've got to be dedicated. It's what Ashley said. You have to write you have to be a workaholic who still likes to drink a lot. Yep. Right? If you can do those two things, you know, and you have the inspiration part of your life, and then you have the sit down, edit, hardcore, be tough on yourself, and then you still like to kind of be out there in the public eye, then you'll have that. You will find that career. It won't be easy, but you know, at least it'll be fun. And I was going to say, anybody who is in New York, and I know they have them in Los Angeles now, the Moth Story Slams, like the main stage gets booked up a year in advance, and they get all the headliners to tell stories there. But the Story Slams, which they have at Housing Works and at a bunch of places around the city, people can come in and tell 5-minute stories. You know, you put your name in a hat, you practice the art of storytelling. These people, there's a competition that works up to the Grand Slam, and then a lot of times they'll get on the radio. And it's just it's a way to meet people that are like-minded, that are moving, that have their eye on the same thing. Get in there, meet the kind of people that you like to know, and those are the sorts of things that I think you need to be doing at this age.
Ash, how about in the motion picture world, as you know, far as you know, marketing yourself, getting the agents, the managers, the value of it?
Sure. I would say that an agent or a manager is completely unnecessary unless you want to have a career and make money. That it's equally important to have the right agent and or the right manager. When we started out, we had an agent who was wonderful, a lovely human being, very smart. He gave amazing notes. He had a great reputation for never sending out crap. And that's why scripts got read when he sent them out. But he was at a boutique agency. You know, he hip-pocketed us, which means that he didn't really sign us at first, and then he eventually signed us. You know, we got the job on Andromeda, which helped a lot. And we had a really good run for about 3 years in that way. We had the show, then we had the movie, then we had the next show. And, you know, I guess my birthday week in 2003, we had a new episode of Andromeda, an episode of The Twilight Zone, and we had Cody Banks come out all in the same week. Happy birthday. I thought it was awesome. You know, and agents from, you know, and managers from like, you know, William Morris and from ICM and from CAA all called. And they said, hey, do you guys want to sit down and meet and talk? And we said, oh, no. We're not going to do that because we're loyal. But what we didn't understand is it's a little bit like playing a video game. You know, it's like playing Halo. I mean, you know, you can be a tremendously skilled player, but you have to get the bigger guns if you want to go to the next level and be successful. And we didn't get that. So one of the reasons why our career went fallow was because we didn't have a big enough gun. And it was only after we got onto Terminator that changed. Paul Haas, who's like one of the 800-pound gorillas of television, called us because we had popped up on the grid as the first guys who got hired, and he's like, who the are these guys? So we went in, and he kind of gave us this whole presentation with like 8 people. It was like the teamwork speech in The Untouchables. I thought he was going to break out a bat. And we said, well, can we think about it? He said, sure, take an hour. And one of our friends, who was a very successful television writer, said, if you guys say no to this, we can't be friends anymore because I can't anybody who's that self-destructive. So took our hour and we said yes, and that changed everything. And it changes everything for a couple of reasons. Number one, there are two reasons why a reader will read something. Number one, because they know the agent in question and they know their taste and they trust it. Number two, because of the name agency on the cover sheet. Number three, because it's their agent and they're reading for a favor. And that's mainly to do with television. What all of those things have in common is it's the agent. But what you have to be careful of is that you have an agent who is invested in your success and really gets you. Now, sometimes that's a luxury. You can't always get there. And it's taken us a while to put together our team. And by team, I mean army. We have 3 television agents. We have 3 feature agents. We have 2 lawyers. We have a manager. And our is like our mama bear, and she runs that army, and she makes it happen, and she makes things go, and she's amazing. And we couldn't do it. Also, we have a literary agent, but it took a while to put that together. So you can be a great writer. You can be great in the room, which means, the whole thing about liking to drink as much as you like to write, which basically, whatever you're doing, you're an aholic. And you can be a fast, hard worker, but, if you don't have somebody to push you forward, you will not move forward. The end. You'll get your opportunities, but when those opportunities come, you have to help you to take advantage of the opportunity that arises.
So the last, we're going to move to open the floor to questions. I just want to touch on one quick thing about platforms for storytelling. So, you touched on the fact that it's all about the stories. You have to be able to tell a story no matter what. But, for all 3 of you tell stories, and now there's, you're telling stories over a mix of, media. Some, in regular television, it's only starting to change, but now they want to continue the story, on iPads and whatnot. How is that? Have you started to see that change in your worlds, and how has it affected writing, where you're now writing for different media, but it's really one story, one set of characters, this, that, and the other thing?
Yeah, the closest I've come to that is when I worked on The Good Wife. I was just doing freelance assignments, but the people who were staff writers had to write, one of the characters has a blog, they had to write that. They had to do their tweets, and they had to do Facebook, and I do think that's really distracting. As the character, yeah. And I think that's really distracting, and I'm glad I didn't have to do it. Because to me, that's just not, if I want to go figure out who a character is when I'm trying to create one, I sometimes write monologues from them. But to try to do it while you're trying to, do the job is just really difficult. And the job is already really difficult, so that's somewhat of a problem. There was something else you said that I can't remember.
Carrying the story to other...
The thing about the storytelling, the movie that I'm writing now, I had to go and meet with an investor and convince her that I can write a small budget film when I haven't written any, I've written a couple of movie scripts that weren't produced, so I had to convince her. And what I said to her was, storytelling is storytelling. When I left MASH, I wanted to go do Hill Street, and I had to sit down with the network and explain to them how I knew how to write a 1-hour show as opposed to a half-hour show. And I said, the story has a beginning, middle, and end. If it's a 2-hour, you write more pages, but it's still a beginning, middle, and end. And everything is, one thing that's true is everything is very compartmentalized. So when I was on MASH, I had to convince them that I had written, they said, you're not a drama writer. Well, what I knew was when I came into work in the morning, I put the comedy scenes aside until I could get into a good enough mood to write them. And I wanted to not do that, so that's why I wanted to go write drama. But every step of the way, I did movies of the week, I did miniseries. Every time I have to explain to them one more time that storytelling is storytelling. And to me, that's just the bottom line of it.
But I do think different ideas that we have lend themselves to different mediums.
That's true.
Like I've primarily been a novelist, but this last book that I wrote felt like it should be on TV. There was something about it that felt like it needed a different kind of treatment. And I had another idea that was very, very visual. I'm working on a graphic novel, and I've never done that before. But it's like that particular idea feels like that's where it needs to be. And it's a weird thing. It's kind of hard to describe it, but I think when you are a storyteller, you just sort of instinctively know. You know, and it used to be that your publicist did all that Facebook tweeting and stuff, and as you know, everybody is shrinking in the book business, that's where authors are having to step up and do that stuff themselves. And, you know, that's where it does get exhausting. You know, you want to be doing your work, you want to be doing your writing, and you have to go.
And you got a deadline.
And you got a deadline, and you got to turn things in, and then at the same time, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're up there trying to make up some blog post to build a platform, because everyone wants a platform now. And it's a little bit easier for novelists, you know, like especially people that write nonfiction, really have to bring in their own audience. You're expected to do that now. So factor that into, you know, how you're going to spend your day and make sure you're comfortable with it. The idea of a writer locked in their room creating art, it's done. If it ever existed, it's done.
And
now.
so many things have had to do with the budget shrinking because, you know, it used to be that if you wrote a novel, your agent sent you on a book tour.
You went on a huge book
it,
tour.
And they made the things.
Exactly.
And, you know, when I wrote my book, they got angry with me because I didn't know any talk show hosts, so I couldn't just call them and say, have me on your show.
Yeah.
And they'd call me and ask me what my publicity ideas were, and I would say, I don't have
your
one.
job? Exactly. But you have to kind of start thinking like that. So I do think that is where the digital age is changing the role of the writer. You're having to wear more hats maybe than you used to in the good old days, where there's just a lot more money flying around. Yeah.
Well, I remember when I first started, one of the other story editors said to me, we can do our work in 2 hours a day, but never let them find that out. You know? and it was true back then, but it's not true anymore.
Yeah.
Ashley, for Fringe and then for the motion picture world, are you involved in the carrying the storylines onto other platforms? Not necessarily with when they do it for advertising purposes, but now when they do it for like just general content purposes? You know,
it's funny. I never did that within the context of a single property, but obviously I've written features, written TV, I've written books. I was the editor on a comic book for a while, which was an experience. I just wrote like an episode of a web series for a friend. And here's the thing. Part of it is, it's like, well, how do you kind of think of how do all of these elements play into some other platform? And we were on Fringe or Terminator, we would have conversations. How do we play like into the web series? Or how do we play into the comic book? We would actually have those conversations on staff. We wouldn't necessarily do the writing, other people would, but that was part of the discussion. And it's like, well, does that stuff matter in terms of, is it something that you consider to be canon? And that's kind of a highfalutin way of saying, do we care about it when we write the next episode? Answer, no. But that said, I think, somebody said that story is story. I think that's absolutely true. That structure is the coin of the realm. When you write a 1-hour TV show or when you write a feature, you are exercising subtly different muscles. It's like the difference between being a marathon runner and a sprinter. Your legs are still moving, but at different rates of speed. It's fast versus slow twitch. One of the reasons why feature writers often have a problem in television is their mandate is write this thing that ever happened to this person ever. Okay. Well, when you're writing television, you need to take that and you need to deal with it in much thinner slices. You can't do that. The other thing about television that's weird is that the structure is not really organic. I mean, you have a beginning, you have a middle, you have an end. Let's not lie to ourselves. You're also writing to the act outs. You have to sell soap every 10 minutes. If you're on Fox, every 8. It's just that's reality. So you have to structure those acts so that you have people wanting to come back and watch it again. You don't have to do that in a feature because people's butts are in the seat and they're watching. I think, even with novels, there are things that you can do in a novel structurally you can't do on television or film. And I can tell you, having done sort of a reverse adaptation process, there are things that you can do for TV and film you cannot do in a novel, and you have to think about it differently. So whatever medium you choose, I think that you need to really examine that medium and say to yourself, what are the structural requirements of this? When I tell a 3-act story, what does that mean in the context of what's the function? Forget bullcrap. Talk about the craft. What's the craft of what you're doing? Be the craft in his office for 12 hours a day. Hold up. I do, and I'm half crazed.
All right, we're going to turn it over to you all to ask any questions. So, and just we don't have a floor mic, so just speak up. But anyone have any questions for the panel? Elaine?
Hi, my name's Elaine Vega, and I'm a global studies and theater arts major. And I'm currently in a theater history class, and I'm learning about French neoclassicism and how there are rigid guidelines for each stories. And throughout each time period, there are typically specific rules as well for the plots, characters, and more. And throughout your experiences, have you come across any contemporary limitations? Like how much creative freedom does a writer have currently in film, television, and novels?
In TV, you have about this much. TV is all about the restrictions, but you know, Ashley was talking about the act structure, and after you've done it for a while, you're thinking not linearly, because it's a 4-act structure so you can sell soap, but it's also a 3-act structure. It's really Acts 2 and Acts 3 are really Act 2 in a 3-act structure. And you know, when we put scenes on the board, I've heard people say that's a fourth act scene, and you go, yes, it is, because you just get a sense of it. But what I always, you know, people complain about having to sell soap. I always just figured embrace the structure. Yeah. And, you know, I get excited when I think of a good act out. Or if I always, you know, I was in a tone meeting one time talking about the alchemy of the 4th act, and the budget people were looking at me like I was insane, which I could be. But, you know, you just start to get a sense of the rhythm of it. And the 4th act is a certain way if it's going to work. So after you do it for a while, you know. When you first start, they will tell you what the restrictions are, and people will fuss at you. You know, your showrunner will, you know, sometimes not be in a good mood. I remember my sister, who's also a writer-producer, said when she was hired on Northern Exposure, Josh Brand called her in, and he said, you just need to know one thing. I don't have time for your feelings. and she said, and then she became a showrunner, I became a showrunner, and it's the truth. They don't have time for your feelings, and what they have to teach you, they have no time to teach you, so they teach you harshly, you know. And I because of Dr. Catron's class, I had a really thick skin, because we would read the plays and everybody would tell us what was wrong with them, and you know, everybody was caustic, and you know, so you have to have a really thick skin, and then it's a lot of just it's saddle time. It's just stay there, and it'll start to make sense to you, and you'll start to know when something is a 4th act.
And it seems to me, and you know, I'm just dipping my toe into this water coming from the large architecture of literary novels, and my novels are kind of literary commercial, but they're pitching my work towards HBO and Showtime, and there seems to be kind of a cultural moment right now where it's kind of the author's moment. You have David Simon, who did The Wire, you have Terrence Winter, you have Matt Weiner, you have these kind of like author figures, and it's less like the 22 episode network, and it's 13 episodes, so it's shorter. It's a huge canvas of pulling in so many different plot strands, which kind of lends itself a little bit to a novelist brain. And I think there's a little bit more freedom now. How many of those shows are going to get picked up? I do not know.
Well, cable is a lot more like writing a novel.
It's more like writing a novel, and it's got that kind of episodic building of character. And somebody asked me yesterday, where do you see the novel going? I see the novel going to television. I think some of the best writing in America today is on HBO and Showtime, and sort of that kind of large structure novelistic. I hope it lasts. You know, I know Boardwalk Empire is staggeringly expensive to produce, but you know, it seems that it's catching on, and it does give me a little bit of hope for kind of storytelling in its larger form, to have a little bit more freedom. Though even that said, I'm still writing the four act. You know, here's my teaser, here are my 4 acts. Every time you got to end on the cliffhanger, and I love it though. I love that structure. I think it's great. I think it's a fun way to write.
Well, and Game of Thrones is a perfect example
Game
of
of
a
Thrones
novel
is perfect. It's a novel
that went right to HBO.
Went right to HBO. And it seems like it's the moment for it right now in a way that hasn't been for a very long time. So I hope it sticks. Anything else?
Ashley, did you have anything? Did you hear that question or?
Freedom. Yeah, you know, first of all, somebody said I think that that television writing is some of the best writing that's happening right now. I think that's absolutely true. I think that the quality of filmmaking, period, in TV is actually much higher than it is in features. The great thing about working in television, or at least my experience in it, was that you actually have, you know, even as like just a producer, not even the creator. You have a degree of power and control that feature directors really, truly only dream of. Just because television is a businessman, you don't shoot pages, you shoot days. That piece there, it's like it is eating your pages. You know, it's eating your days. It's eating everything in its sight. So if you're fast enough to stay on top of it and feed it quickly enough, other people who are basically driven by fear or by marketing or whatever don't have time to screw with you. That's not really the case, I think, in features. I think as a general principle, though, the amount of creative freedom you have is directly proportional to your willingness to accept being fired. You know, and it sounds funny, but it's true. I think, you know, it's like that Joker quote from Tim Burton's Batman. I'm going to make art until somebody dies. Well, I'm going to make art until somebody fires me. You have to write the best that you know how to write that answers the mail, period. If somebody gives you an assignment, you're working on a TV show, you write something great. And they might not like it. They might fire you. They might tell you to start over again. They might tell you you suck. Okay. But, you know, you're the one who's responsible for making the choice to go out on a limb, to write the thing that's meaningful to you, that feels correct to you. And you have to be willing to A, fight for that, and B, recognize when you're wrong, which is a whole other conversation. But taking notes from somebody is not the same thing as ceding creative freedom. That's not true. If the notes process is managed correctly, if the involvement of the studio, of the network is managed correctly, it can be a net positive for creation. But it all comes back to your attitude, to the context you bring to it, and you know, your desire to do something that makes you happy, versus just try to please whoever is writing your checks.
And if I could say something very briefly to that, just from real life, the novel that I'm trying to adapt has a subplot that takes place in 1940, and it's set in the present. And I had a 78-year-old character, and the first note that my TV agent gave to me is like, you can't put a 78-year-old man on TV. Nobody wants to see it. So I was like, that's a full third of my novel that I would have to lose. And I was like, ugh, do I even want to do this? But what I did is I looked at what I was trying to thematically accomplish in that 1940 section. I moved it to 1953 during the Korean War. I ended up getting something that was so much more thematically rich, that's taken the story in a different way, but I think a much better way. But I only got there because I was willing to let go of a full third of what I had already written.
You end up with a different way to do it well.
Yeah, you end up with a different way to do it well, but it still has to be done well. So you've got to be flexible.
Well, and we talked about that yesterday in the career roundtable about the bridge between what needs to sell to get out there and you know, being realistic about what, you know, that it's a business.
That it's business.
You have to work.
People are investing millions of dollars on you. It's like you can't be fucking around. You know, it's like you don't want to just listen and be a slave to whatever they're saying, but you have to understand there's a lot of money behind it. So, you know, me as a literary novelist, it's like, oh, I can hold my ground because there's not as much money behind it. But if somebody's putting millions of dollars behind what you're doing, I think you really do.
They get to have notes.
They get to have notes. Exactly.
Kind of cut both ways. You know, when we got hired onto X-Men, and it was a crisis. We went to dinner like the night that they said, okay, do this. It took half an hour to close the deal, and then we were at dinner with Bryan Singer, and he gave us like this whole speech about, you know why people get fired off of franchises like this, and he just kind of went into this whole thing about how you listen to those people, the enemies of creativity. It was quite awesome, actually. But you know, the thing is that you have to remember, if somebody's paying you 6 figures to do this job, if you're working in television, they are. If you're working in features, they are, even if you only do it once a year. What they're paying you, they're not paying you to be a typist. Nobody in the world is doing that. They're paying you a lot because they're terrified, because they want you to come in and to be a problem solver. They're hiring you because you have a creative brain and they want you to apply it to their problem. But you also have to use your analytical brain and say, well, what is it that you want? What is the definition of success? And then really listen. because the truth of the matter is that, there's people who are spending millions of dollars, and there are millions upon millions, like $1 billion franchise on the line. They'll say a lot of things that don't make sense, and you have to listen to that. But what you have to find in the center of it is the thing that does make sense and make that work, because that's why they hired you. If they wanted to just pay somebody, they could save a lot of money.
Most of the time they're right about there being something wrong,
Right.
and I listen to that, but they are not right about how to solve it because they're not writers, and you have to convince them that they're not right about how to solve it by coming up with the real way to solve it and show them that. I really agree with Ashley about, especially these days, having to be willing to be fired, but when you're first starting out, you don't get to do that. Then you just write any horrible thing they make you write, because if you get fired as a baby writer, you're not going to find another job. But when you get older and you have a reputation, you can get another job, then in order to do good writing, you have to be willing to be fired. Because a lot of showrunners are crazy people. Seriously. I got fired from one show because I turned in my script and he didn't have any notes on it, and I went away for the weekend, and he fired me for going away for the weekend because he might have had a question. I took my phone with me and my laptop, and he knew how to reach me. But showrunners are crazy people. And one show I worked on, it was who was it, Jerry Bruckheimer, and I had not written on any of his shows. And the way they do it is you turn in your stuff, and then they go, okay, open your script. All right, on this page, you're not going to write that scene. You're going to write this scene, and give you dictation. And then you are being paid to be a typist. But it was horrible because they gave my script to somebody who turned it into a mess, and so they were unhappy with mine, but I was doing what Ashley said. It's like, you paid me to write a good script to put on the air. If you put this mess that you want on the air, you're going to be off in 2 weeks, which they were. But, the showrunner came to me and he said, well, we don't think this is working out because, you don't see the show the same way we do, and blah, blah, blah. So we have an idea, which is we'll pay you the same, and you just be a consultant and, sit in your office and you can read scripts and have notes. And I said, I have a better idea. Why don't you buy me out on 50 cents to $1 and I can get the hell out of here? So that's what I did, and I went and worked someplace else. But, when you're first starting out, you just have to keep your job, get credits, and build it into a point when you can say, I think I'll leave this job now because I can't be a writer here. So have common sense about that and talk to people who have gone before you.
Well, we're out of time, so I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank Karen, Sherry, and Ashley for joining us. And we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with the next panel.